My name is Chris Lloyd. I'm a senior architect for Oxford Computer Group. I'll be joined by Drew St. John, who is a senior consultant with Oxford Computer Group. And today we're going to be talking about supercharging Office 365 with enterprise mobility and security, really focusing on security groups and conditional access. But before we begin, I just want to go through some housekeeping slides here. Our agenda today, we're going to be looking at Office 365 groups, how they relate to Azure AD groups, as well as your on-premise Active Directory groups. We're going to look at using groups to manage license assignment in Azure Active Directory, look at some Office 365 conditional access, and an introduction to Microsoft Teams. So we're going to try to last about an hour. We might come in a little bit under that, but it'll be roughly an hour. You can submit question and answers, or sorry, we'll submit the answers. You can put the questions in there, and then we'll address them at the Q&A section at the end. And this webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to the recording. So a little bit about Oxford Computer Group. I'm not going to go into big sales pitch here. Oh, no. Well, while PowerPoint tries to figure out what happened to it, a little bit about Oxford Computer Group. We focus solely on identity and access management within the Microsoft stack. We've been Partner of the Year 7 times, and we also provide training for identity management and the Enterprise Mobility Suite. We do Office 365 deployments. So the whole gamut around identity and the Microsoft stack. All right, going to get right started here, right into this. Office 365 has many powerful features that enable employees and organizations to be more productive. And some of the highlights are real-time co-authoring within the Office applications, organization intelligence with products like Delve and SharePoint and Yammer, and the ability to work anywhere with any device. We're also bringing in team-based collaboration with SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. And I just want to take a quick moment here to do a quick poll, and just wanted to get to see if you guys are using Office 365 and Enterprise Mobility. So you have an option there to pick just Office 365 or both, or just EM+S. All right, looks like just a lot of just Office 365 stuff. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close that. And so when we have, my goodness, PowerPoint is not happy with this right now. So with Office 365 and Enterprise Mobility Suite, we're looking at using one common identity, offering single sign-on to various different applications within your organization, whether they be SaaS-based apps or other apps. That one common identity is a very easy thing for end users to control. They're only in charge of one username and password. And it's also providing data protection with Azure Information Protection and Office 365 data loss protection, as well as device protection. So we've got users that are using their mobile devices, and so we're looking at doing device protection, not only on the devices themselves, but on the individual apps, looking at mobile application management. We're also, Microsoft's also leveraging behavioral analytics. This is found primarily in monitoring when the users are logging in and applying different security challenges or denials of access to applications based off of those analytics. Enhanced visibility in the cloud is also a main feature within the Microsoft EM+S, looking at not only the Office 365 cloud, but also other clouds like Salesforce, Amazon, Google, and then also multi-factor authentication, being very granular on when they can invoke multi-factor authentication on a wide variety of different applications, but also using that behavioral analytics analysis to choose when to invoke that multi-factor authentication to give a higher confidence of the user who is logging into that service. So the EM+S components that we'll be referencing today, and we may not reference them since this is more focused on Office 365 and those groups, but those components include Azure AD Premium, Azure Information Protection, Microsoft Intune, Advanced Threat Protection, Microsoft Identity Manager, and Azure Identity Protection. There are more products within EM+S, but those are some of the highlights. All right, going right into groups. So groups have become, I would almost say, more important. They were always important within your on-premise Active Directory, but now that we've extended to the cloud, they've become extremely important. We drive many of the items that either give users access with groups, whether it be distribution groups or on-premise security groups. And so those first two up at the top are the groups that we all know and love and we've had around forever, right? And so those have been synchronized using Azure AD Connect to synchronize them to Azure. And they can't be managed in the cloud because they're mastered on-premise. So any changes that you want to do to those groups, whether they be changing the naming attributes of those groups or changing the members of those groups, all have to be done on-premise. There is no write back of users to those on-premise mastered groups. When we brought in Office 365 to the mix in Azure AD, which is the backbone of Office 365, we now had the ability to create groups directly in the cloud, and those could either be distribution groups or security groups. Now these groups can exist solely in the cloud. They don't get written back down on-premise. And they can be used for a wide variety of things, much in the same manner that your on-premise groups can leverage or can be leveraged in the cloud, but the membership can be driven from the cloud perspective. And with Azure AD Premium, with those groups, you can create dynamic groups or criteria-based, whereas in if a user has a specific attribute that you've configured in the rule logic for that group, they will automatically fall into that group. And the last one and the most recent addition to these groups is the Office 365 group. This one can be written back down to on-premise, but solely as like a reference object if you have hybrid exchange. If you don't have a hybrid exchange environment, there's really no reason to write that back down on-premise. But if you do have a hybrid exchange where you've got mailboxes in both places, you will want that group to be written back, and really it's just a reference so that the on-premise exchange server can reference that group when it's delivering and sending email. But these groups are now kind of open, for many for the organization to create at will, which is a scary thing, but it's also a very liberating thing for end users. I have a couple of friends that work in various organizations, and it takes them, some of them have come to me and said, hey, why does it take so long for my IT department to, create a SharePoint site, do X, Y, and Z, everything that they need to get their team up and spun and ready? And it's really because there's a roadblock in between IT and actually creating these groups. Well, the Office 365 group is intended to remove those roadblocks. Now, at the same time, administrators are, kind of going, oh, I'm not sure if my users are ready to create groups and things like that. And there are some things to take into consideration for that. But within those groups, you get a SharePoint site will be created. It can be included with Microsoft Teams. So there's file storage also within SharePoint. Planner can be used, which is a lightweight Scrum project management tool. And so a lot of the Office 365 features that Microsoft is now pushing are around those Office 365 groups. And Drew is going to take you through some of the features from an admin perspective of how you can manage those groups. There's some attestation where owners have to attest to needing that group, and then after a certain period of time, if they don't attest to it, it'll be deleted. And there's also some naming policies that can be applied to the email addresses of that distribution group. So I just want to recap. I know I mentioned Azure AD Connect as a tool that is leveraged to synchronize identities from on-premise to the cloud. We've had this tool for quite some time. With the Enterprise Mobility Suite, which includes Azure AD Premium, you would get all of these features. So you can synchronize your object to Azure AD. It has password write back, meaning if users change their password in the cloud, it can be written back down on-premise to Active Directory. This also leverages your on-premise Active Directory password policies, meaning it has to pass those policies before it is actually set back on-premise. You can use password hash synchronization, which is syncing a hash of the password to the cloud from your on-premise Active Directory. There is also pass-through authentication, which is one of the latest and greatest new authentication scenarios. That's essentially almost like an ADFS light, but very light, because it is simply an agent that's connecting to your on-premise Active Directory and validating the username and password, as well as login restrictions and account disablement policy or account disablement attributes on your Active Directory objects. You can also extend the schema, so you can actually add attributes, either already existing attributes from your on-premise Active Directory, or if you've extended the schema to your on-premise Active Directory, you can include those to be synchronized up to the cloud. There's also device write back, and then there's Azure AD Connect Health, which not only can monitor the sync engine of Azure AD Connect itself, but it can monitor ADFS servers if you're using ADFS. It can also monitor Active Directory directory services, so your on-premise Active Directory, and monitor replication issues, show you how many times LDAP binds or Kerberos logins are being leveraged. Quite some interesting information that comes off of that to be leveraged. All right, so as we talked about the one common identity that Microsoft is pushing here through Office 365 and EMS, adding applications to your environment. And this is pretty much as simple as it sounds, where we're going to, any cloud applications that you own can be configured with single sign-in through Azure AD. So Azure AD is essentially the IDP, if you're familiar with federation terms, or the identity provider. And you can add certain applications in here and have them federated from your Azure AD tenant. There's thousands of applications within this environment. It makes a very seamless experience for the end user. The end user can access these applications from the Office 365 waffle. They can go to myapps.microsoft.com, or they can go to the app directly and they'll be redirected. If they're not already authenticated, they'll be redirected to the Microsoft authentication page to sign in. You can manage these application access through user attributes. So just like we talked about groups before, these would be cloud. These either could be on-premise groups, but they would have to be managed on-premise, or they could be cloud security groups where they have a rule. So all users wear such and such. They're in this department. They're they have this business unit code. Whatever attributes in Active Directory that you could use to define owner or users of a said application. And then some of those applications even include outbound provisioning. So Salesforce, ServiceNow, both applications that I've configured for different organizations for user provisioning. Users fall into the group in Azure Active Directory, and then they're provisioned outbound to the systems in ServiceNow and Salesforce. There's a very easy way to configure the attribute mappings. And then once the users are disabled on your on-premise Active Directory, that synchronizes to the cloud, and then disables them in Salesforce and ServiceNow or any other SaaS applications. And that's being done through the SCIM protocol, so SCIM, and that's how Azure Active Directory is facilitating talking with SaaS applications like Salesforce or ServiceNow. So conditional access, this is a big one. So we have The traditional perimeter is gone, where we used to think of it as my network is my wall, or including a moat maybe. And now we're Office 365 is allowing us to empower the end user to go work from anywhere, right? So that's a big item, not only with just facilitating end users, but also keeping employees happy. They want to work from wherever they can to be productive. And so we still want to make sure that they're secure. We want to make sure that we're using known devices. So we can leverage identities with MFA challenges, as well as encompassing Microsoft Intune, which allows us to enroll the device, make sure the device is compliant, it's encrypted, it has a PIN. The user has, when they registered, maybe they had to register with an MFA, or we can even say, all right, we can force you to register only inside of our network, right? So we force the user to register with Intune only internal to your existing perimeters network, and then after that they can access the applications from wherever. And then if the device is lost or stolen, we can wipe it. We can either wipe the full device, or we can just wipe the business critical apps using the managed application side of it. And then from the app perspective, we can even include conditional access on the individual applications that you've federated in Azure. So looking at an application saying, all right, this is, we are accessing it inside the network or outside the network. Maybe outside the network, we do an MFA check, and then we allow the user in. Inside the network, we kind of trust you more that you're inside the network. We don't do the MFA check. And then there's also Azure Identity Protection, which is a risk profile. And so Microsoft is leveraging all of its analytics because they have a tremendously wide footprint with the amount of identities that are being stored in Azure and Office 365, and how many different attacks they see, and are able to pull that all into a machine learning algorithm and track those, and then bring that to organizations to allow them to see the risks that exist in their organization, and then develop policies on how they want to mitigate those risks. So if a user signs in from one location and then 5 minutes later they're across the world in India, well, maybe we challenge them for MFA, maybe we make them reset their password, or maybe we just deny them access. They can't get in until somebody else has reviewed that. Not only are they doing items like that, but they're also buying password lists off of the black market. And so what they do with those password lists is they take them and they, if you're syncing your hashes, so your hashed hash passwords to the cloud, they can compare the hashes of the password list that they bought with whatever that you've synchronized to the cloud, and then they can notify you if those passwords have been indeed compromised. All right, group-based licensing. So back onto our original topic of groups, or one of our original topics. When we first started deploying Office 365, the only really main ways to do license assignment en masse was to use a PowerShell script. And these work fine. Usually we would have a PowerShell script running on a task scheduler, going out and pulling in all the unlicensed users, and then I'm assigning the license. And within that PowerShell script, there may have been different logic parameters that we might have been checking. So some users in this department get this type of license, and depending on how granular it was, made the PowerShell script super long. So now they've brought group-based license assignment into Azure Active Directory. And so not only does it apply to Office 365, but it'll do it for EMS and any of the SKUs that you have within Azure or Office 365. And so they're controlled by groups. And as we said earlier, we can control groups membership in the cloud via different conditions, making a dynamic group. The group can be controlled on premise. So if you have an identity management platform that's managing groups, those groups can be leveraged to assign license. And then down to the individual plans within those licenses. So in this group, we could have turned off Azure Rights Management or the planner, and set it up that way. And in fact, that is one of my demos to go do right now. So providing PowerPoint doesn't crash one more time on me. So All right. So I've got a group in here. This is Azure Active Directory. I'm in the groups pane or blade. And so I've got an E3 license group that I've created. And then over on the left, I have a licenses tab. So group membership, I don't think I've populated this with anything, but the licenses is where you would configure. So you would come in here, find a group that you have. It's going to work on security groups, whether they be security groups from on-premise or whether they be security groups that were made in the cloud. And then I can assign license. So I can configure the product here. I can either do, if I just select Azure Active Directory Premium there, I can then pick the assignment. So there's 4 different plans underneath Azure Active Directory. And let's say we're not using MFA for some weird reason, but we're not going to allow that on this this group. So we click OK there. And now anybody who falls into that this group is now going to get Azure Active Directory Premium P2 with 3 of those 4 services selected. And then I previously went in here and set up Office 365 Enterprise E5 with some different options checked. So these would have been pretty lengthy PowerShell scripts to do this because they were very complicated when you were dealing with the plans, especially with the older MS Online PowerShell module. And so this is a very simple way to really, simplify your license assignment. You can come in here, visually see what people have assigned and what they don't have assigned based on this group membership. A lot of times I get asked what happens if I have one group that has these sub plans, but this one also has sub plans that this one doesn't. It will be a combination of both of those groups. So if I have, let's say for taking instance, this group doesn't have planner, but I'm also a member of another group that does have planner, I would get planner as a plan from that group. All right, hang with me, PowerPoint. I'm almost there. So access reviews. So keeping in with our groups, and if you're familiar with access reviews, looks very similar to another Microsoft product called Behold, and Behold is an attestation role management application that's really designed to handle Active Directory groups on premise. It integrates with Microsoft Identity Manager. But this, to me, and everything that I've seen and demoed with it, it's still in preview, looks to be an attestation campaign for groups in the cloud. And so you can actually run attestation campaigns defining either the group owner or somebody else can be defined, and you can send out attestation campaigns on those groups. And since we can also tie these groups into applications, so we can say, let's say this group gives access to Salesforce, means we can audit Salesforce itself and say, all right, application owner, these are all the people that have access to Salesforce. You're going to get an email to a link that'll take you to this review page, which is over on the left, and you can either approve or deny these the access to Salesforce. In doing so, they will be removed from that group once the campaign finishes out, and anybody who was approved it will remain in that group. And it doesn't have to be the app owner, it could be the user's manager. Additionally, they have set it up in here so that guest users, you can audit guest users. But I think this is a great idea, since and when we say guest users, we're talking about B2B users. If you've shared something with SharePoint to an outside entity, that's also a guest user. And auditing guest users, their access in your environment, this would be a great way to do that. All right, I think this is my last slide before I turn it over to Mr. Drew St. John. And the last one here is really talking about one of the data protection elements of Office 365. And we actually use this at Oxford, and if you have sharp eyes, in the lower right-hand corner of my PowerPoint presentation is a tag or a footer that says Business Confidential. And that's because we've classified this as a Business Confidential PowerPoint. This is a Office add-in. If you see here, if I get my recovery screen there, you'll see I have different labels up here. And these labels can be tied into different protection schemes. whether they be protected or not protected or protected, and they're using in the back end to protect this is using Azure RMS. So for all you compliance nerds, it's a FIPS 140-2 compliant encryption, and it can lock it down, so that users can't print, they can't edit the content, outside users can't have access to the content, and that applies across all the Office applications. Now, one of the things that just came out into preview is a files and SharePoint crawler, which will actually actively go out and look at files at rest, whether they be on a network attached storage device or in SharePoint, and it will go classify those files based upon rules that you would have put in place, either through some Office 365 or Azure information protection built-in data loss prevention rules, looking at things like social security numbers, credit card information, things like that, or your own custom regexes, however you want to configure them. We're looking at this, it almost seems like they're taking FCI, so file classification infrastructure, and kind of applying some of the ways that you would have previously used that on Windows file servers and kind of expounding upon it and bringing it into using this cloud-based service. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Drew St. John, and he's going to continue on with the presentation.
Thanks a lot, Chris. We're really excited about that crawler being in preview now because it's going to ease some of the burden that was previously placed on full indexing operations that were both time and resource intensive. So hello everybody, my name is Drew St. John. I'm a senior consultant with the Oxford Computer Group, as Chris had mentioned. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I'd like to talk to you about Office 365 and the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite, or as we've been referring to it as EMS or EM+S. Over the course of the next few minutes, I'll be covering some of the immediate and long-term benefits of EMS across your cloud stack. We'll talk about controls you can use to secure the services and data within your tenant, and how we can use EMS to empower your users and protect your data at the same time. Chris has already provided some very valuable information and insight into EMS tech offerings, and I'll be exploring some of the tech that you can turn up once your EMS licenses are procured and assigned to users. We'll talk about the immediate benefits of unlocking this powerful functionality across your services, and we'll talk about controls, advanced features that create a much larger umbrella of protection for your environment. We're also going to be talking about managing Office 365 groups and Microsoft Teams. I'll give a little introduction to Microsoft Teams towards the end of this presentation. Next slide, please, Chris. One of the most powerful and desired, yet what I think to be the most underrated benefit of deploying EMS in your Office 365 environment is the consistent user experience. Providing access to company resources consistently across devices, users can work from the device of their choice wherever they are. That consistent user experience, I don't think gets enough credit, but as soon as it doesn't work, everybody's going to give it credit, right? I think we've all been there. So users working from the device of their choice, accessing corporate resources regardless of where they are, allowing employees to work from the device of their choosing will allow them to be more comfortable and result in less time lost with a ramp up to a new process. We're doing all the heavy lifting on the back end to ensure that the single user credential experience is preserved for your users. This unified credential enhances user productivity with self-service and single sign-on experiences. We're going to help users be more productive by providing each with a single identity to use no matter where they access the resources from, whether they're working in the office or remotely, or they're connecting to a cloud-based SaaS application. You saw the number of applications that was just a sample in the Azure application gallery. By giving each user SSO, they're enhancing productivity, their own productivity, and mitigating risk, especially when we add in MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, which Chris had referred to earlier. MFA provides the additional security through forcing user verification and forcing that user to validate their identity. So how do we activate and enforce controls around access to applications and data? That's a very good question. With EMS, we can attack on multiple fronts. We can control who gets into what apps and who can see what data once they're in those apps. We can monitor, detect, and take action when personally identifiable information, or PII, is at risk with data loss prevention. We can protect user and organization data and access across all devices with Intune. We can break down, classify, and protect our data content with Azure Information Protection, which Chris showed you we are using at Oxford Computer Group. We can use machine learning to further evaluate our work patterns and extend our watch to the on-premise Active Directory environment with advanced threat analytics, which protects against known threats and exposes data on potential breach activity, which is very important. And it does that through abnormal or at-risk user activity identification. ATA is an on-premise solution that does require a little bit of a hardware and software commitment. And once it's deployed to your on-premises environment, you leave it alone for 30, 60, 90 days and let it learn. It watches user work patterns and begins to build profiles of that typical activity. And while it does this, ATA is also evaluating your environment for vulnerabilities to known attack vectors. This resultant set of data, the advanced threat analytics activity information, can then be consumed by your IT and security principals to aid in response to or prevention of breach events. Once your ATA system is aware, you can detect and respond to suspicious activity in minutes rather than hours, days, or weeks. Next slide, Chris. Powerful data loss prevention, or DLP policies, are really going to be the root or backbone of our protection schematic when we use EMS in Office 365. Those DLP policies can now be extended across the entire Office 365 tenant. It's not just for Exchange Online anymore. Anybody who's worked with DLP standalone products in the past, whether it be Symantec or whatever the software provider was, you knew that those tools were very specifically targeted towards a certain platform or a certain technology. And they were hard to configure. And they were even harder to maintain, with false positives often outweighing the positives. So that's all changing now. As our landscape changes, our modern workforce and workplace changes, so does our protection. Now, content stored within SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business can be indexed and evaluated for the presence of sensitive information. This unified data loss prevention can be leveraged in the security and compliance portal of your Office 365 tenant, and it's something that you can begin working with right away. While other workload-specific data loss prevention solutions are still supported by Microsoft, the unified DLP policies bring the Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive services into the fold, creating a unified capability that works better across multiple Office 365 workloads than the workload-specific variants. eDiscovery is a great example of where the content search execution through the Security and Compliance Center is faster and more functional than the equivalents found in Exchange Online or the SharePoint Online standalones. Microsoft encourages us to use Office 365 content searches, and now they're applying that same approach with unified data loss prevention policies. In addition to targeting the content stored in your tenant, EM+S brings the ability to create and enforce conditional access policies that not only add controls to who can access what apps in Office 365, as Chris showed earlier, but also provide the ability to control what happens to the content consumed from that app access. And you get a greater degree of flexibility with CA, as conditional access policies can be applied to users, groups, or devices. Earlier, I spoke of users accessing your cloud resources on any device from anywhere. How do we institute controls across all the different devices? We do that with Microsoft Intune, a powerful player in the EMS space. Intune is the cloud-based, in case you're not familiar, Intune is the cloud-based device management platform included with EMS, which delivers mobile device and application management across all devices, iOS and Mac, Android, and of course Windows. This unified endpoint management enables features such as selective wipe for lost or stolen devices. Using Microsoft Intune, IT can selectively and remotely wipe any device, including applications and sensitive company data, management policies, and networking profiles. With selective wipe, the user's personal data remains intact on the device, but the device is removed from Intune, And that resultant unenrollment removes any company information the user may have had stored on that device. We can also leverage Intune to deliver policy-based access control to corporate applications and data. We can set policy-based access controls for compliance and data protection with Azure Active Directory. With this feature, you are able to create conditional access policies that will block users who are trying to log in using non-compliant devices, for example, or you can enforce a policy that requires users to first enroll their devices to gain access to a server or a resource. For compliance exercises within your environment, configuration policies can be sent directly to your managed devices through Intune. We can provision certificates, VPN profile settings, Wi-Fi profile settings, and we can do it all right from the portal. We can take this unified administration even further with integration to leverage an existing System Center Configuration Manager deployment that you may already have. It becomes a very powerful combination of tools to have in your toolbox. Now, the same rigor that's applied to securing access to applications in your tenant and DLP policies that are aimed at protecting the sensitive information relevant to those applications or available as resources on your network, those same rigorous governance-related activities are carried into Office 365 groups and Microsoft Teams. And we'll talk more about what that really means in just a couple of minutes. Chris, I'm ready for the next slide. Office 365 groups are a shared workspace for email, conversations, files, and events where group members can collectively get stuff done. It's a unified space for users to work together. And it's a new thing. It's not the latest and greatest. It's been out for over a year, but it is relatively fresh in the Office 365 tenant. You can use groups to collaborate with people across your company. For example, you can create a group for your sales team and then invite other Office 365 users to join the group from your organization, and then together they can share documents and they can have conversations via email, share meeting notes, and collaborate actively in OneNote. And this is all related to specific accounts or opportunities that the sales team may be working together on. Office 365 groups consolidate the functionality of traditional resources that are shared into a unified space for collaboration. So shared mailboxes, shared calendars, and document libraries, for the most part, can be replaced by Office 365 groups. Document libraries, however, are the exception. Those are always going to be around. The cool thing about Office 365 groups is that they can be extended beyond the organization with support for external users being added via invitation. This is called guest access, and Chris alluded to this earlier in this presentation. We can add existing guest users that have already been invited to participate in perhaps other groups. If they're existing in our Azure Active Directory as a guest, we can add them to other Office 365 groups. If they don't currently exist, we can extend an invitation via email. A guest member interaction will take place via messages in their inbox primarily, because they will not be able to access, for example, an Office 365 group site. They will be able to participate in calendar events, email threads, and they'll have access to the group OneNote. And if it's enabled by the admins, they can view and edit files related to group activities. The Office 365 group experience is very similar to the SharePoint Online team site experience, with file sharing, calendaring, and conversations all being present in the same virtual space. We talked a little bit about how with an Office 365 group, your users are empowered to create groups at will. While they're in their Office 365 applications, those applications provide a mechanism for them to create groups on the fly. For smaller organizations, this is great because they have an already overtaxed IT infrastructure and support department that is going to get overwhelmed with requests, tickets coming in, phone calls constantly. Create this group for me, create this group for me, please. Empowering your users to create their own groups is both a blessing and a curse. For larger enterprise environments, it can definitely lean more towards the curse, because now you have this chaos of multiple Office 365 groups arriving daily, showing up on everybody's radar. Duplication is a problem. So you have to take control, and you have 3 levels of control that you can decide on as an organization with Office 365 groups. You can use open provisioning or leave it alone and let the users continue to create their own groups. You can identify a department that's going to be responsible for the creation of those groups with IT-led provisioning, or you can take that even further with the IT-led provisioning and then delegate a subgroup. Perhaps it's your service desk that have the permission to answer a phone call and create a group based upon a request or a certain use case that's presented. Depending on your business, you might want to look at the various methods of controlling how Office 365 groups get introduced to your environment. Next slide, Chris. Upgrading to Office 365 groups is very straightforward. You can transform your existing distribution list Office 365 groups right through the Exchange Admin Center in your current Office 365 tenant. The eligible distribution list will show up in your Exchange Online or Exchange Admin Center, and you can select the group individually, or you can select many at once, so you can do a bulk upgrade. And those eligible groups presented in the interface that I show here, you can upgrade them. It takes as long as it could be minutes or hours, depending on how many groups you're working with at the same time. These groups can be upgraded by admins, either via PowerShell or in the Exchange Admin Center. And there's a caveat to that. There are some groups that cannot be upgraded through your Exchange Admin Console or via PowerShell in the cloud, and those are the groups that are mastered on premise. You can, like I said, you can target specific groups, or you can do them in bulk, and it's all available right now in the portal. And you can see that there's a little new indicator on the upgrade group icon. When you get into your groups in the Exchange Admin Center, you'll see that. Next slide, please, Chris. This is a neat function in Office 365 groups, and it was recently introduced. Group expiration. So if you have Office 365 groups that are unknown, or you have known Office 365 groups that were related to a very specific use case or activity, you can set those groups to automatically expire. And with a setting of as low as 1 day, the recommended beginning or hopping in point would be 31 days. You set the duration of that life cycle for that group in your Exchange Admin Console. I'm sorry, in the Office 365 Groups Admin Blade. When you set the expiration, notices will be sent out in advance, starting at the 30-day mark, and then all the way down to the day before the expiration is scheduled to hit. At that point, the owner of the group will get the notification saying, this group is set to expire on such and such a date, and give them a link that they can click on to renew the validity of that group. Or they can decide to just let it die and let it run its course. This is the attestation piece that Chris referenced earlier. So a group owner is able to control the life cycle of an Office 365 group based upon the settings that the admin has placed upon the request of the creation of the group, or a request that came in after the group was already created. If an Office 365 group has no owner, those notifications about expiration are going to be sent to the tenant admins. And oftentimes those can end up in unmonitored email accounts, or they're not delivered to the admins. If they don't have a license, they're not going to get it. So it's very important to identify owners for the groups, even if it is a placeholder account that is licensed for Exchange Online, so you can catch any of those notifications before they slip through the cracks. Again, can be targeted to specific groups. I took a screenshot here out of my tenant, my demo tenant, and I only have one eligible group that I could set for expiration, and it's just a generic project group. And you can see under group lifetime in days, there's a custom option. There is a series of selections that are predetermined lengths, and then you have a custom, and the defaults, when you choose custom is 0, you have to change that. You can also enter an email contact for groups with no owners. If you want an alternate recipient to be identified, that is a recommended course of action. And then you can enable expiration for Office 365 groups, either all of them selected like I have. I've selected the one, or you can say none, and it doesn't apply to, you won't expire any of the groups automatically. Next slide, Chris. Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams was recently introduced. It created a lot of buzz and a lot of attention at Ignite earlier this year. Microsoft Teams is, don't want to jump ahead of myself here. So I want to start with the first bullet point here, because there's been some confusion, and I've been approached by some of my clients regarding how do I know that I can start using Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is available for users to be enabled to use Microsoft Teams across basically every SKU in the Office 365 license group. They're enabled for Teams in the SMB SKU group, Enterprise SKU groups, and EDU SKU groups. Now, the core functionality does not change across any of these different license types or different plans. However, the compliance capabilities do change, and that's all going to be based upon the rigor that you have applied to the applications and resources that users in Microsoft Teams are going to be pulling together. Microsoft Teams is built upon the technology behind Office 365 groups, and it's powered by the Microsoft Cloud. It's the newest part of the collaboration story. Microsoft Teams is the inner loop for your team or any team in your organization. It's really designed for high-velocity chat-based workspace interaction, where you can have informal, real-time conversations around very focused topics or specific subgroup goals within a group. Creating a Microsoft team adds this persistent chat capability to the Office 365 groups experience in Outlook, and it's built with a multitask worker in mind. You know, those people that are members of multiple project teams, and they jump in and jump out of projects multiple times per day. Those people need immediate immersion, and they need to be brought up to speed. And they need to iterate throughout those work streams quickly and effectively. Microsoft Teams brings all of that activity into a single interface. Teams adds real-time collaboration, not only with persistent chat, but also audio conferencing. And yes, as of September 27th or so, Microsoft began lighting up a lot of the Skype for Business Online functionality for Microsoft Teams. So now it supports PSTN calling and dial-in conferencing. So Microsoft Teams effectively can become, or has become, a mechanism to be used as a smartphone or a soft phone on your device. So you can dial PSTN, you can dial, you can invite people to dial into meetings that you're creating within Microsoft Teams. A lot of the Skype for Business Online functionality is currently being lit up or will be lit up shortly within Microsoft Teams. So you'll have that complete voice integration with the persistent chat and the SharePoint Online and file sharing and email conversation threading. This leverages Azure Active Directory identities to provide access across all of the involved Office 365 services. And we're talking about the usual cast of characters: Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive for Business. And while this is a really cool tool and has a lot of leg left in it for Microsoft, it's not currently being made available as a standalone resource. So next slide. Teams brings users with common goal activities together in one place. When a team is created, a lot of things, workflows start getting triggered on the back end. A SharePoint site is provisioned. A document library is included with that SharePoint site. A OneNote specific to that Microsoft team is created. And an Office 365 group is provisioned for use with the team. As I mentioned, Microsoft Teams offers dial-in conferencing, PSTN calling. In effect, it becomes very similar to the workloads that can be handled by Skype for Business Online. The good news is it's not a replacement for Skype for Business Online currently. It can be deployed to coexist with Skype for Business Online. So if you currently have a large consumption of Skype for Business users, a large consumption base, you can stand up and deploy Teams and start using those audio features in harmony with your SFB deployment. If you want to know more about Microsoft's long-term vision for Microsoft Teams in regards to the voice capabilities that are shared with Skype for Business Online, hit that link at the bottom of this slide, aka.ms/Skype2Teams roadmap. Microsoft's already put together some target dates for the milestones, both short-term and long-term, and it outlines the vision, the long-term vision for Microsoft Teams in regards to Skype for Business Online and that voice activity. And I believe that's all I've got. So what's next? Just a simple question. Okay, I lied. It's not all I got. I got a simple question for you. Is your organization making the most of Office 365 for security and efficiency? And I want you to think about this question. Had I asked it before you joined this presentation today? And more importantly, is your answer different now than it was before you attended this, this presentation? So if your answer is yes, then congratulations, you're doing a great job. If your answer has changed or is no, we're really not making the most of our Office 365 subscription, then I'd like to invite you to complete an Office 365 envisioning workshop with us. And you can learn more about this workshop at oxfordcomputergroup.com/workshops/Office 365.
All right, well I think that wraps it up for our presentation. If there's any questions, we can answer them now. Up on the screen, we've got our social networking sites with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Hey, Chris, I'd like to run a quick poll here.
Go for it.
All right, so just going to put a poll up here. For those of you that are interested in learning more about our workshop or reaching out to us to conduct a workshop with you, please respond to the poll here, and then I will close it up here in a second. Looks like we're still getting some responses. Excellent, excellent. All right, thank you very much for participating in that impromptu poll. Now, Chris, we do have some questions that I think, if we're not seeing any come in, I did get some throughout the presentation though. Do you want to review those right now?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So the first question was, I have Skype for Business and Teams. Can I use both? And I just gave the long answer, but the short answer is yes. You can. Coexistence is fully supported by Microsoft, and there are no plans to reduce or remove support for Skype for Business Online in the near future. Second question, this is, I think, more directed towards you, Chris. How granular can you get with group-based licensing?
Right. So those it can be extremely granular, right? You could have had a group for each of those sub-plans. Would I recommend that? Probably not, but you could have had a single group for each sub-plan, and you could have gotten extremely granular with it. But I would suggest taking a pretty broad brush to that. Now that's always dependent upon whatever how many different licenses you have and how much fun you're having with turning off plans and keeping that. But I would take broad brush strokes to those groups.
All right, excellent. And here's a great question. Which groups are eligible to upgrade to Office 365 groups? Excellent question. Now the documentation is kind of scattered and some of it is not up to date. You can upgrade cloud managed, simple, non-nested distribution lists to Office 365 groups. And that includes your cloud-based DLs, your DLs that have send on behalf set for them, or moderated distribution groups or distribution lists can also be upgraded. And the documentation's a little bit unclear on the moderated piece, and it says nothing about the send on behalf setting. So if you're getting frustrated trying to find the answer to that, that is current information. And then finally, how can I convert my on-premises? Oh yeah, this is a great question. How can I convert my on-premises distribution groups into the Office 365 groups? You'll need to, a real short answer here, and there's a little bit of work involved, but you'll need to delete or rename the on-prem mastered distribution group and then create a new Office 365 mastered group using the same membership. So that's the short answer to that one. Excellent question.
You heard it here, guys. He said that's a little bit of work. So I imagine if you only have one distribution group, that's probably a little bit of work. But yeah, so there is some timing scenarios with that. Obviously, moving 20,000 groups over into to that, deleting and then recreating is a bit of a task. But you can phase it out, and that's not a bad direction to go if you're all in on the Microsoft Office 365 experience. I think that's all we have. I had one person ask to put up the link to the workshop. It's right up there on the screen now, and I think that's it. So we're going to wrap it up. Appreciate you taking the time out today to listen to us talk about Office 365, and please reach out to us if you have any questions on any of those social or email links. Thank you, everybody.